Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello. I'm Sam Parrotto in the flesh here, and you are listening to Expedition Self. I'm probably a little giddy today because we're about to talk about one of my most favorite subjects, and it is how to create a raging love affair. So I think about it like water rushing through a gorge with jagged rocks jutting out from the sides and curves and turns up ahead that you can't see around. Like there's no stopping it. And the only thing you can do is go with it and learn to master the highs and the lows, right? So as we talk about how to create a raging love affair today, I hope you brought your life jackets and your paddles because we're going to climb into the raft, head downriver, and take in all the sights. So hopefully you'll be able to tap into some moments when you've been in relationship and think, oh yes, that's what was happening then. Or that's what was missing out of that moment. This is a call-in radio show, and every week I choose a subject that is all about going inside. And even though we're talking about creating a loving, raging love affair that looks like it's on the outside with someone else, really, it's all about how we relate, how we connect, how we really embody ourselves from the inside out. So the phone number that you can call in on is 202-570-7057. And then Chris, the producer, he'll put you on hold, let me know that you're there, and then we'll chat for just a little bit. So, I've got a lot of material to share here. It's this big subject, right? So I'm fully expecting that this is probably going to be a 2-parter. And so that means there really is plenty of room for you to call in and take your time and share a little bit about your relationships or maybe even your reaction to the manifesto that I'm going to share as I go through the hour. So, okay. I know the word rage, it doesn't really conjure up the best or even the most loving of images. Like I think of turbulent and stormy, and like the idea that I'm not using it in the literal sense of the word. In fact, more like it's actually the opposite of the word raging, which is it's the opposite. What we want in a relationship is the opposite of docile or flat or impassionate or cool, or slow moving and unengaged, or here's a good one, sluggish, right? That's not what we want in our love affair. So a raging love affair, it's all about you being willing to give it over, to stretch, to practice, to show up, to learn about yourself, and continue to stay as unconcluded as you can as you go through it. I want to start, and I'll probably end by saying that having a raging love affair doesn't just pertain to the relationship you have with your significant other. It's really a kind of, a mindset that you can bring to any relationship of your life, even the one that you have with life. So like all things, being happens in 360 degrees. You can picture turning yourself around in a full circle. So what do I mean by this? Well, your way of being that you bring in one area of your life is naturally expressible in all the others. Because when you're working at that level of your whole self, way down deep underneath, all those behavior, like the focused behavior, and you don't have to focus on the behavior, it means that you're able to integrate things because you're actually seeing them differently. You're actually understanding life and deconstructing kind of formed ideas that are limiting you. So who are you beneath the intentional behaviors? I think I didn't say that right. Who you are beneath the intentional behaviors is who you are at the being level. So when you get a shift on that plane, it touches every aspect of your life. and every relationship you engage in with other people, and even that relationship with being alive. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start and tell you a little bit about me. So I got unmarried 7 years ago, and because I was now out in the dating world, I said to myself, girl, what do you really want? And this led me to create a little book of wants that described this person that I was seeking. And it was fun, and I drew in it and wrote words, and it gave me a way to express the qualities that I was looking for without it being too intense or serious. But then something else happened, and it led me, really the doing of the book and kind of moving through this led me to write a personal manifesto about what it meant to me to have a raging love affair. I cannot even begin to tell you how cathartic it was to put in writing what mattered most to me in my belly, and to give myself this permission to hold nothing back, to get up, like up and under myself with the idea that I did deserve what I wanted, and I didn't have to apologize for it. I'm kind of curious. Have you ever sat down and written what you really want in a relationship? Really written it out? So I want to say that as I actually felt all this movement, there was this internal thing I had to get comfortable with. And I don't want to bypass this without at least mentioning it. And that was the idea of I had to be willing to not be with someone, like to be by myself if I couldn't find someone who would be interested in doing this raging love affair dance with me. And for those of you who have pondered being in a relationship or out of it, you probably know that brings up lots of feelings, right? It's stuff that you have to amalgamate to end up being okay with actually being solitary. But it gave power to my manifesto when I got good with that, when I got comfortable with it. So during that time, I found myself in a whole slew of conversations about love. I read stuff by Osho, and of course the 5 love languages was popular. So I get into debates about, well, what was realistic and what wasn't. And of course, how to navigate the modern dating scene when people had so much history they were bringing with them. It was fascinating, though, because I realized it's one thing to have a raging love affair with someone. But here's the kicker. Surprise! You actually have to find someone you want to have it with. I know it seems so obvious, right? And so a lot of times I'd hear people say what they weren't. Oh, that's not my love language, so don't expect it of me. Or I don't do gifts and love notes. Or if you're one of those people that has to be busy all the time, that's not me. I can keep going here, right? I'm not a big talker about feelings, right? So I don't want to do that either. And then there's all the conversation about, hey, I need my own time. I have to make sure I stay with myself, and I don't expect my needs to be met by anybody else. Or I just want a companion who doesn't bring too much drama. Do you know how many times I either saw people write this or heard them speak it to me? Right. And I'm kind of like, well, what is life if it doesn't have some drama in it? Right. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that everyone is dealing in some way with what they think they want. So I'm describing it in the initial dating space, but it's also there when you've been with another person for a long time. And I think this conversation about raging love affairs, it pertains as much to those of you who have been with someone for a long time too. So here's some examples. The commentary about like people that have been in a long relationship, and I hear this lots, is, listen, I learned to stop wanting that from my significant other because it just created frustration, and there were other things I could appreciate about them. Or I get those needs met by others because it's impossible to get them met by my partner. See, the idea that the nature of a long-term relationship means that it becomes routine and familiar, and you can't expect it to feel like level 4 whitewater rapids. Yeah, we have ways of reconciling and adjusting when we don't get what we want. We begin to settle, and we get caught and not wanting to really speak fully and completely on our own behalf, because at some level we get afraid of losing or being rejected. We just accept it. So, as powerfully and in my feet as I can possibly say this to you, the first thing is get your head and your heart around exactly what you want. Whether you're looking for a partner or existing in a committed relationship, figure it out, explore it, experiment with it, learn from others, and start putting words on it. I'm hoping you really got that, right? This is important. And it works on so many levels. One of the things I did since 2010 is I've read about 8,000 romance novels. So you could laugh at that, but really it helped me to figure out what kind of leading man I was looking for. You know, what I found exciting or interesting between two people, and what made my heart race, and what I was not comfortable with or what I didn't like. It was like reviewing 8,000 case studies and allowing that research, along with my 30 years of marriage and my newfound dating activity, which I did a ton of, to shape where I was going to go next. So to my surprise, I realized I wanted someone who was a bit wild himself. You know, a little unpredictable, but dependable all at the same time. You know, I recognized that I wanted a life that was active and outside, experiencing nature, and that finding someone who had logged in more hours at that, it would be great. That person could serve as a great guide for the scaredy cat part of me. But perhaps the biggest thing was that I realized I didn't want someone who was perfect, someone who always said the appropriate thing. I didn't want smooth and polished, because actually, for me, I found that kind of boring. So this really was a shock to my system, you know, that my perfect partner was not singular in his approach to things. And he didn't need to follow all the rules, which gave me a ton more room to experiment with who I was. And that's what I want in my raging love affair. So if you don't get it into a clear picture with language that goes with it, you're really not going to stand in it. You won't speak on behalf of it. You won't notice when it's missing. And you won't show the other person how to show up, because you're at some level not showing up. So this is what I'm saying. Get clear about what you want what you feel, and how you envision it playing out every day. Like, describe that for yourself. Get in touch with it, because this is where you start. And when you work on this, notice how deserving you feel. That you could do journal writing for weeks and weeks on end about that. How deserving do I feel? What made me feel undeserving, right? Because you got to clear out those cobwebs. This raging love affair, this going down the rapids, you got to be able to handle the next turn. And that means this is a good time, right? To go inside, figure out what that means. See, what gets in the way? You don't want to be too demanding, or you don't want to come across as selfish, right? These are the things that are the language of feeling undeserving. So this stuff has to get worked through if you're going to have that raging love affair that you want. By the time we're done with this show, you're going to hear raging love affair about 22 more times, because it's what makes your heart come alive and engage and want to burst through and generate. So, you know, when you're on the radio, you have to watch your P's and your B's and your T's. I just really blew it with that word burst. Okay, back to the conversation. So when I talk about it, bursting through and generating, and it's what will have your heart hang in there when the conversation doesn't go the way you planned. I mean, let's face it, we tend to back away too soon. We may not know it, but we're so scared on the inside to be rejected, right? But when you're going to cultivate this raging love affair, then what happens, it has you invest in chasing your wants and calling them and attracting them to you. So, okay, I want to remind everyone that I'd love to hear you call in, because I've really started to talk a little bit about, do you put your thoughts, what your wants, your ideas about what a raging love affair would feel like, do you put that on paper? Do you get it into your own language? Do you think about it? And I would love to hear how you do that, or if you've done it, right? That would be so awesome. So I'm going to share my manifesto that I wrote, some pieces of it. And as I share these pieces, then we'll talk a little bit about what they mean and why I did them. And hopefully you'll be able to then say, oh, you know, Sam said this, but I'm thinking I'd rather have that for myself. Right? So remember, as I go through mine, even if you totally disagree with what I wrote, you can still use it to shape your own. And the other thing I want you to know as I give you a manifesto is I do a lot of it in terms of alwayses and nevers. And I do that because my psyche is a little tricky and it likes to find the loopholes. So the alwayses and nevers that I would typically not use like in everyday conversation, in my manifesto, it really helps me step up to the plate, you know. So, okay, we're going to go on break. When I come back, we will start diving into my manifesto. I hope you will call in. It's 202-570-7057.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Well, welcome back. I'm Sam Parrotto, and you are listening to Expedition Self today. And we're in the middle of a big topic, how to have a raging love affair. And just before break, I asked everyone if they were ready to hear some of my manifesto that I wrote. So that's what I'm going to share right now. So here's the first sentence of it. We commit to take ourselves on, to push our own limits, to challenge our internal resistance, and find ways to be in the world more powerfully, always transforming, totally committed to our own growth. Okay, that's one. And two is vulnerability is the name of the game, baby. Practice, mistakes, always looking for ways to gain a more rich and profound relationship to yourself and to be accepting of mine. So these two statements are all about how someone approaches or shows up to the relationship. You see, to me, how you show up and what you're committed to, who you want to be for yourself, it has everything to do with what becomes possible for us, right? It also makes it more likely that we'll talk through things to tackle the differences and explore the uncovered stuff. The thing about that is that we have a tendency to start out maybe being open and honest and being willing to look at differences, but then our truths start going underground and we start keeping secrets or withholding, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So a commitment like the two statements that I shared earlier, which is this idea that we are taking ourselves on and pushing our own limits, it serves as a foundation or a platform to keep bringing us back over and over when we would normally default to typically human behavior, right? But here's the thing. Finding someone who doesn't know what this is, which is likely, right? Or even if they do have some sense of what this is, I have to be willing to talk about it and offer insight about it and work through it and share what's going on with me, right? Because I'm doing the same. I'm learning. I'm taking on the things that I'm saying. Just because I have these commitments and I'm the author of them, doesn't mean I know how to do them either, right? Life is like that, right? Our ideas and reality often just aren't the same. And the journey is really in bringing them together. So what I'm saying here is that just because I create my manifesto and I feel strongly about it and I put a stake in the ground about it, all it's doing is setting up the opportunity for us to actually work something through, or for me to practice. Just these two elements of my Raging Love manifesto are enough to get the water churning and the fire burning, right? Because when we share on that level, when we take that kind of risk together, we're churning the insides of ourselves up in a really big way. And that churning is what we call being alive. We're not getting that from someone else. We're the ones who are bringing it. And this is one of the biggest challenges, right? We have to be willing to be in what I call self-leadership. I am I'm the first and the last one to bring what I want. That self-leadership thing really gets a little sideways in relationship because we start getting hung up about what are they doing and how are they doing it and did they do it? Did they bring it? It's not that isn't part of the conversation. It's certainly a vulnerable one, but the idea that we want to be the ones who are responsible for creating what we want, that's the key. So to get underneath, who would I have to be? What do I have to be committed to? What would I have to think about and be focused on to make that possible? That's how I came up with those first two, is to challenge my own resistance and to pursue vulnerability. Wow, that's a mouthful today. Right? Is that I had to think about what's the platform, what's the basis, where do I start from? That if I'm committed to this, it takes care of a whole bunch of other things. Because I know if someone is focused on these two things, then we have something we can work from. And if they don't know what those things are or how to do them, then that's part of the fun of creating a new or a renewed relationship, right? In my first marriage, the thing I started with was we need to bring new information. And at the time I was like 24. And that was really all I understood. And I could tell that I was feeling kind of bored of just doing the routine of life. And it became so clear that the new information would bring this freshness. Now, at the time, I didn't know to call it vulnerability, but it fit into that category. And it was such an interesting thing to say, could we just have 3 new pieces of new information this week, right, as a start? Because you see, without fresh material coming from each person, without a desire to question what we're rigid or locked in about, we really destine the shared space to be routine, repetitive, familiar, and all that becomes predictable, which allows us to kind of go unconscious, right? To just revert back to habit so that we're like running on a hamster wheel, even in the relationship. Think about aliveness. It's not just the same old rinse and repeat pattern that happens. Aliveness is when you don't know what's around the corner, when you can't predict every single action and reaction, and when you're called into responding spontaneously in an unplanned way. It urges you to move out of that automatic comfort-seeking wiring of the brain and be new in the moment. So one of the things I saw in the characters in my books was how much fun they had bantering. Of course, the writer created them, and being playful in their communication, And it wasn't always straightforward. They'd be a little clever or seductive and provocative in their language, in a way that kind of like danced around or skirted around the racy edges. And so I realized that communication can be unpredictable and fun without being hurtful. And this is one of the things in relationship is that I think a lot of times communication gets more and more watered down and washed out because the hurtful parts, the parts that have to do with unresolved issues and conversations, it gets funneled and pushed into the dialogue. So one of the things that became really important to me was I wanted to be able, right, to have communication that was fun and unpredictable, but didn't leave a scar. So when I looked at this, I thought, right, it means someone has to be willing to look at what's unconscious for them so that they can take the risk with the communication and that they don't end up using it in a passive aggressive or a hurtful way. So you can only play with communication when your real needs and wants are cleaned up. I might need to say that again. You can only play with communication when your real needs and wants are cleaned up and you're open to hearing feedback that something you said didn't land okay for somebody. And so since that's not always going to be the case, you have to be, right? You have to bring this willingness to look at these unintentional missteps with your words without being defensive. Right. So you see communication as a way to bond and put fuel in the tank and fill all the gaps. But you also are totally willing to have it be looked at, to talk through it, and to use it to explore the relationship further. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to have a raging love affair, then you get clear on what you have to be committed to so that the foundation for taking risk in communication is laid and that the desire to explore and learn about the self is part of the agreement of how you relate. That was a huge, huge mouthful, but it's everything. I mean, if you're really looking at this piece is absolutely critical and essential. So I'm going to say it one more time, okay? If you want to have a raging love affair, then you get clear on what you have to be committed to so that the foundation for taking risk in communication is laid, that it's safe, and that the desire to explore and learn about the self, yours and theirs, is part of the agreement of how you relate. So this brings me to another piece of my manifesto. You care about their life even if it makes you feel threatened or uncomfortable, and you talk about it. No secrets, no secrets. How often have you been in a situation, even with a friend, who felt something threatening or uncomfortable for them, and they didn't really bring that out into the conversation? They said or did something that made no sense or felt completely unsupportive, and you were left trying to figure out how to get back to the aligned place you started in. How often, right? Can you think about that moment? See, this happens in relationship because we don't actually realize that we're projecting something into the situation, and it's skewing our ability to learn together and see more clearly. You see, you can't have a raging love affair unless you're watching for the size of the rapids. And so what I mean by this is that distance destroys relationship. And I'm talking about like emotional distance, right? This emotional distance, it gets created in tons and tons of little ways. And getting uncomfortable, judgmental, or threatened, and not talking openly about it or drawing it out in the other person when it happens. It's pretty much like putting 3 inches between you and them. And when it happens a lot, those 3 inches become 3 miles. And then 300. And before you know it, you've got, that was a yawn, boring, repetitive, comfortable, and probably self-defended. The greater the distance that gets created in a relationship, the more talking that's actually needed to close it. The size of the rapids and the distance between you and the other person, so you know when you've really gotten to understanding and learning, right? That's what you're looking at. And when I say when you've gotten there, you know because your heart feels open. You know because you relax and you feel safe. You know because you actually feel like talking more or expressing more. And when you ask the other person to put more truth on the table and you call yourself to it, This is what it means to bring this kind of rigor and self-motivation to creating the relationship that you want. Okay, I'm going to take a big breath. So we just talked about distancing. We talked about making sure you put in words what you're really wanting to create. And we also talked about this idea of how do you get to what you have to be committed to lay the groundwork for all of this relationship stuff, all these pieces, all these conversations, the activity of it, that when you get involved in it, you don't run into walls and defenses because you're laying the groundwork for people to be open and have this green light. So these parts of your manifesto, they're starting with the deepest, being focused commitments. Who am I going to be? Combined with making sure that you can communicate about anything and everything. And that you're constantly removing I'm not this kind of person, or I don't communicate about that. All of those comments are really a form of self-protection. And self-protection creates what? Wait for it, right? What does it create? Distance. Emotional distance. So the more you can work on dropping the self-protection, the closer you'll be, the more that rapids will rage around you, and you'll be able to completely handle them with ease and aplomb and grace, and you'll actually thrive on them, and you'll realize you're at the source of those rapids. So yeah, this is probably a little controversial, but I'm saying the statements that start with, "This is who I am, so I won't do that," are definitely places to challenge ourselves in relationship. Where do you say that? Where is that true in your life? Because we have lots of them, right? Everyone does. Right now, in my world, I'm just trying to bust them up one after a time. It's like, I always go to bed at 10 o'clock. I never eat breakfast before 8. Like, it's like, wait a minute. How do we open up all those limits? How do we open those gateways, right? To give ourselves an opportunity to connect in relationship. So the growth in all of this is to try on the other person's way of being and close the distance by getting in their world, thinking about what it's like to be them, by talking, by being brave enough to share what's scary or embarrassing or you have shame about. Raging love affairs happen because we take the lid off of our constant filtering to be appropriate or to be acceptable, and we begin to risk by creating a safe place with that other person to really explore who we are and who they are. So right here, I want to say that you may start doing that, and the other person is like, "What's going on with you? Were you with your sister again?" Or, "I thought you stopped thinking about those things when we had children." Or, "Have you been drinking?" Right? You have to get that if you're trying to turn up the heat or volume in your relationship that you've already been in for a long time, it's going to take a long time to turn it up. And you have to realize that you're establishing a new agreement when you do this. And that means a whole lot of talking about why you want a new agreement. Now I'm going to stop right here. We'll come back to this because we've got a caller, Diane. I'm interested. Tell me what you think about raging love affairs and what we've been talking about with this manifesto.
Well, I certainly think it's an incredible, interesting topic. I have a question to ask, of which I think I have tried to practice over the years, but at times certainly not done well at that. I think my question is, if I am going to try and start a conversation, and I am going to be vulnerable, and I am going to speak my truth, and that I have worked on the words that I would like to express and share, and they don't land like I think they're going to. The individual does not respond, or they respond with what I would say, I just got cut off at the knees, and I get shook, I get upset, and I sometimes I feel like, okay, then I'll talk about it some other time. But I don't always get a reaction that lets me continue talking, even if I say I'm going to be vulnerable. I want to speak my truth. This is something that I want to share with you. And they don't come back with any words or any conversation other than, I don't want to talk about this right now.
Well, you've got two issues there. So one is that you haven't laid the foundation for them to actually hear what you're saying and be open to it. So you're going in really, really cold, right? And then, so without that, you can expect to go in cold. I mean, what you described to me is exactly a classic experience that everybody has. If you haven't really created a basis and foundation for this kind of open space and relationship. So what that means then is when you describe yourself as getting cut off at the knees, earlier in the show, I talked about self-leadership. You actually expect that. So when you go in to talk about what's going on for you, what you'd want to actually do is set it up where you say, now listen, I'm going to share some things with you that I'm pretty sure you're going to have feelings about, and you're going to likely not want to tell me those feelings. But I want to share it, and I'm going to stay engaged with you until we actually talk through it so that I get to hear your side of the equation as well. And so what happens is being vulnerable is also when you're trying to create a raging love affair or a kind of connection like you're talking about, what you're really doing is helping them get on the table too, helping them to show up also. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But what happens if they don't respond? What happens if they
it's a great question. It's a great question, but we have to go to break for right now. Can you hold that question until we come back from break?
I will.
Okay, you don't mind staying online, and then we'll talk about that when we return?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay,
I
great.
will stay
we'll see
online.
you when we're back. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Well, hello, I'm Sam Parrotto, and you're listening to Expedition Self, and we were just chatting with Diane, one of our regular callers, and so you asked a question before we went to break. Could you ask that again?
I think the question I asked was, even though you are partly engaged in the beginning of a conversation, already explaining that you want to tell the truth, that you want to be vulnerable, you want to share, and that you don't get a response at all. Whoever that person is, that they don't respond. They walk out of the room, or they just stand there. How do you get that to move?
Well, again, you talk right into it, right? So your heart has to be completely in that space, right? You have to say, wow, I so don't want this to go this way. I really care about you being able to talk with me about this. And I also care if I've said something that's hurt your feelings or that's affected you in some way. I mean, it's really all through words and not giving up. And, you know, the thing is that we're talking about what you're describing as someone who's really not wanting to be in a conversation with you about this. So it's like, well, how do you little by little, step by step, keep opening the space so that they actually want, they actually find that they can be on it and it isn't that scary and that they're not going to lose something and that it's okay.
Right.
Because that's what we're really doing. We're creating a new way to interact that they're not used to. Now, I do want to say in your world that it's so much better if you create that every time you're in conversation, because then it's part of the relationship instead of this singular moment that all of a sudden feels like it's a big deal.
Oh.
So the more you are being somebody who's open and creating all the time, the less those moments are hard.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will certainly start practicing that because I think the more I do that, maybe the easier it would even be for me to continue instead of shutting down myself.
That's right, because you make it part of what you're all committed to and what is the real agreement in the relationship, right? So,
well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for calling.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay. So this is really, it's so funny because Diane called in and asked the question at exactly the moment I was going to talk about it, which is that you have to realize that you're establishing a new agreement when you do this. And that means a whole lot of talking about why you want a new agreement. It means that you're actually going to take some time. You're going to run into walls because people don't like someone else changing the rules on them. They want to know what's familiar. They want to know what's comfortable. They want to settle in. Again, we're constantly drawn to that side, right? So in truth, it is easier to start as you intend to finish in a new relationship or in any relationship. There haven't been any agreements formed yet, right? So being what you want in every moment, it helps the other person to choose and get clear on whether or not they want to sign up for those commitments. And it's interesting because that's just where we got to with Diane. So here's the thing. Just because we want something, just because we're committed to it, it doesn't mean we're right about it. And this is such a fine, difficult line to walk because you're holding out a vision, a set of ideas, or a way of being together, but you're also the student. This is important. So even when you say, hey, I think something happened in our conversation or in the way we're relating that we need to talk about. You know, you got uncomfortable or something because what you said to me didn't feel sensitive or supportive. And I certainly felt stuff. When you say all that, you have to be paying attention to what's going on in you and what it's plugging into inside of your own world. You know, in my psyche, the biggest pain of my life was feeling like I was left in this void of nothing with my feelings when I was around other people. You know, nobody talked about why they were saying what they did or what was motivating them to be who they were being. So for me, when I stand in this commitment, I'm also willing to feel that all over again as part of my growth, standing in the middle of nothing. And mostly I'm grateful for it. I don't like how it feels, right? But I get to think about what's there for me to say, to cause conversation. I get to feel my heart hurt again so that I actually better appreciate how hard it was to be in my skin then. So this growth thing, as I said earlier in the show, it has to go both ways, even if you're the one being the bigger stand for the raging love affair part of the relationship. So these commitments will probably make a lot of sense. So here's 3 more pieces of my manifesto. It doesn't matter what they want to talk about. You are willing to explore. You want them to feel seen, essential, and important as much as you want it for yourself. That's 1. You want to work through moments when your heart closes up because you can't stand the idea of being emotionally distanced or disconnected. And the 3rd one is when they feel hurt or disappointed by something that's happened, you can't wait to talk and learn more about what lives underneath. right? You want to, and I'm going to just add a little piece to that. The idea of, we'll talk about it in a week or 2 weeks. No, the idea is, why let that stuff stay in the space, work through it, get it cleared out, and move on, right? So this is all about closed-heartedness. Do you know when yours is closed? And do you recognize when someone else's is? And do you realize it happens numerous times in any given day? And it may even be a state of being in any given block of time or around a certain scenario or a topic. You see, the state of a closed heart has been so normalized. It feels so just like it is the way it is. You probably don't even recognize when yours is. It's kind of like it's got a decibel level, right? If your heart is closed at a 9.8, you probably do recognize it. But at a 3.4, it probably slides under the awareness line. So you want a raging love affair? Well then, you're going to start to maintain a vigilance for becoming self-aware of what it feels like for your heart to close. So the signs of that, like you get rigid, you get judgy, you don't want to engage, you don't want to talk. You find other things to do rather than deal with it. You lose energy, you get snarky. You feel disengaged. You might even feel depressed or down. It's a big, big, big deal. The better you get at tending to your open and closed heart, to noticing what's happening with it, the better you'll get about talking about it. And the words, they sound like this. Because I like to give words. When I was learning how to do a lot of this, it's like I just needed to understand what it sounded like. You can always put it into your own kind of syntax or whatever. So I noticed my heart closed when you talked about blank. And it closed for this reason. And I felt this. Now remember, when you talk about your own experience, your work is to make it as much about you as possible and not about them so that they're on the hook about it. But that's kind of for another show. We could talk about how to do that. So this next commitment has to do with what human beings mostly do when they're confronted with really giving themselves over to relationship. And there's 4 here. Okay, these are part of my manifesto, okay? The doings of your life take a back seat to being accessible and available to me or the other person. Getting something done, working, or maintaining your routine is not more important than being with them. That's 1. You find every minute you can just to be in their company. That's 2. You always think and talk about how your words land for the other, caring about how it feels, how they perceive it, and what it activates for them. That's 3. And 4, you never withhold. You share all the time, thinking about keeping the other person in the loop of every moment of your inner life. And you do this because you want them to know, not because you're trying to please them. Pleasing is a way to hold your heart out and just be approved of. So that's a big one. Remember, I said earlier that I did this as always as in nevers. And so I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're like, wow, that's a lot of always and never. But what it does is it just, when you make it that way, it just keeps calling you forward so that you don't give yourself permission to say, yeah, well, I did it then, but I didn't do it there. Right. Oh, yeah, but that circumstance lends itself, but I'm not going to take care of it on that side. Because human beings, we have a way of carving things up so that we land on the side, right, where it's comfortable, and we leave the side where it's not comfortable, to the idea that it wasn't possible, it didn't make sense, it wasn't logical. So that's why I always go for these when I'm working on my own growth, the always is and nevers, to kind of get myself out of my own skin and into the game. Okay, so I could take a breath here. So the antidote to distance and closed hearts is availability, interest, and self-reflection. The antidote to distance and closed hearts is availability, interest, and self-reflection. And when you're willing to look for these, to work on these, to invest yourself, like to really give of yourself, then you're going to enjoy an incredible surge of newness and aliveness and discovery about both them and you. You see, you have distance and a closed heart even with yourself. So you're going to see that this idea of availability and interest and self-reflection can even be applied inside of your relationship with yourself. Because who doesn't want a raging love affair with yourself? Harder said than done. So it's doable whether you're a long-termer or a newbie, because you are the creator, the source of making it happen. So I want to just tell you a short story. I had a man I coached years ago, and he had never really loved anyone, had no children, hadn't been in marriage. His relationships were all comprised of the practical idea of what's a good companion. And of course, he began to work on himself, and he began to open up. And when I met him, he was like, I see absolutely no value to emotion. I mean, seriously, this is where he and I started. So as he began to open up and close the distance and speak a bit about his feelings around his life, why he thought the way he did, one day he shows up in his coaching session and he shows me this love note that came from his long-term girlfriend with tears sliding down his cheek. Not that he would have admitted it. And he said, "This is the only love note I've ever gotten." This is what is possible as part of a raging love affair. It's when you don't just love someone, you actually feel the love happening in real time. And it's creatable because we all have hearts that are waiting to be melted and touched and connected with. So here are a couple of other commitments in my manifesto. And these go to how to create a foundation, because once you have the commitments about who you're being, you're really in territory of building the fabric that wraps around both of you, right? And that fabric, the stronger it becomes, the more you can partner and build together. And when you have the skills of creating a relationship that's more than routine partnership, you can bring that to the other people in your world, and they get encircled by it. And it begins to reignite your space and theirs too. So being a good partner, what does it mean? Because answering this question for yourself and when within the relationship, it can cause everything to exponentially blossom. So here it is. You remember all of the little details about the things they love, and you work to be trustworthy, responding to each and every communication sent your way, even the ones that are hurtful, especially those. They cause you to more deeply connect and reveal more about how your life experience interrelates. You know that your life works better because you practice being completely vulnerable in this relationship, and partnership helps you to see the places where you don't feel powerful or collaborative. That last sentence, partnership helps you to see the places where you don't feel powerful or collaborative. This is huge. And you know, all relationships are lessons about power, where we feel powerless and how we manage to get it back. Oftentimes, really unconsciously. You know, what we do to get it, where we feel that it's taken from us, you know, how we've bought into the idea that one person has more power than another, and how it's used, truly, like all of this. And of course, a thriving wild partnership will definitely help us learn about our relationship to power. In truth, I think if you peeled back the emotional payoff of being in a relationship and the need that's connected, you know, to be connected with others, from a growth perspective, I think learning about our power is really one of the core reasons to be in any relationship. So I want to just kind of end on this one last piece, and there's more to the manifesto, but we'll hit that in part 2. I shared that my manifesto was written as I moved out of my 30-year marriage and read a bunch of books and got involved in a lot of dating. Well, I now actually have an opportunity to bring myself to a new relationship. I'm actually practicing right now, holy moly, with someone. Thank you. And there's so much I'm learning about giving voice to what I'm wanting and needing. And luckily, I've actually met someone who keeps choosing to engage with me when I do it. So, you know, we're all products of the patterning that we absorbed in our original families. And this is true for me, that for all of the communication I longed for, I didn't have an easy time asking for what I needed. And I was so afraid of being rejected or abandoned. So this has been so freeing for me. And I'm getting to practice with creating my own raging, love affair. And you know that book I mentioned earlier? Well, he's got lots of those qualities. And I feel like the writing it all down and by being vigilant and searching for the person I wanted to create a raging love affair with and putting my heart on the line for not settling, I got him. Woohoo! Right. So on that note, I want to read the poem that I actually put here. I hope I have inspired you to think about a raging love affair. We will do part 2 of this soon. But the poem I wanted to read is called Variations on the Word Love by Margaret Atwood. This is a word we use to plug holes with. It's the right size for those warm blanks in speech, for those red-hearted vacancies on the page that look nothing like real hearts. Add lace and you can sell it. We insert it also in the one empty space on the printed form that comes with no instructions. There are whole magazines with not much in them. But the word love, you can rub it all over your body and you can cook with it too. How do we know it isn't what goes on at the cool debaucheries of slugs under damp pieces of cardboard? As for the weed seedlings nosing their tough snouts up among the lettuces, they shouted, "Love, love," sing the soldiers, raising their glittering knives in salute. Then there's the two of us. The word is far too short for us. It has only 4 letters, too sparse to fill those deep, bare vacuums between the stars that press on us with their deafness. It's not love we don't wish to fall into, but that fear. This word is not enough, but I will have to do. It will have to do. It's a single vowel in this metallic silence, a mouth that says, oh, again and again, and in wonder and pain, a breath, a finger grip on a cliffside you can hold on or let go.